in positions of leadership agreed to listen to stories of people who've been excluded from full participation in the ministries of the United Methodist Church. But even as we gather for that purpose, there are some who are still excluded. There is someone who should be in this chair next to me that isn't. So I'm not going to do what I was invited here to do. I'm not going to tell you my story of what it's like to be a queer woman in the United Methodist Church. I'm going to tell you a different part of my story. The part where I'm the child of a gay United Methodist minister. This is the person who belongs here. Most of you know my dad, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing him. But as a quick reminder, I have here part of the Des Moines Register from September 11th, 1999. The first page of the Metro section. There's an article entitled, "Suicide Suspected in Death of Pastor." I'm just going to read you a little bit from the first few paragraphs. "He preached to more people most Sundays than any other United Methodist minister in Iowa. But in his final hour, the Reverend Lynn Ryon turned to no one. Ryon, a longtime United Methodist leader in Iowa, was found dead of apparent suicide Thursday morning at his home, Ankeny police said. At 51, he left behind a wife, 2 grown children, and hundreds of stunned friends and supporters. He was caring, compassionate, outgoing, gregarious, fun-loving, said the Reverend Jim Russell, who was replaced recently by Ryon upon retiring from First United Methodist Church in Ankeny. What was so monumental, I can't even fathom it." Ryon was tapped July 1st to be senior pastor of First United Methodist in Ankeny, which has the top Sunday attendance for the state and is one of the conference's fastest-growing congregations. Before that, he was one of 12 district superintendents in the state, supervising United Methodist churches in the Fort Dodge area from 1994 to 1999, and so forth and so on. My father was well respected. He was part of the inner circle. He was one of you. But everything that you knew about him was just the tiniest sliver of what I got to know about him. I knew a man who could listen to a parishioner, berate people like him as sinners, yet without hesitation be in ministry and prayer with that person, setting aside the pain that that person inflicted upon him. I knew a man who endured divisive debates about his identity at annual conference and general conference, but who returned home to devote himself wholeheartedly to his ministry and to do whatever the church asked of him because he truly believed that his calling was, "Here I am, Lord, send me." I knew a man who hurt deeply inside because he felt that this church that he loved so much, that he dedicated his life to, would turn its back on him in a heartbeat if it knew his identity. I knew a man who was afraid to seek ministry for himself because he feared that, like this meeting tonight, he did not have a safe space, and that acknowledging his identity could cost him everything that he held dear. The weekend before he died, my dad flew to Virginia, where I was living at the time, to visit me. I want to read you something he wrote after that trip. "Tuesday, the fog delayed my leaving Charlottesville. Everything on the ground is so gray and dismal. But above the clouds, the sun is shining, and the white, billowy tops of the clouds is as if it were heaven. I wonder if I can hold these images in my mind. I know I can't go back to the church one more time. I can't do that anymore. I could go on about the pain that the church caused my dad, the pain that it's caused me, our family, our friends. But this is my dad's story, and my dad wasn't one to chastise. He was more into challenging people to be better Christians, to have a better relationship with God, to love each other better. And if my dad were here tonight, I think that he would challenge you to not only listen to the voices of those who are excluded, but to be a voice for those who are excluded. So I'm going to let him do just that. And I'm going to let his voice speak for all of those who remain silent tonight. With these excerpts from his sermon from August 15th, 1999.
Our story today in Scripture is about a determined woman outside, left out, excluded from her society's benefits, but insistent that she was still a part of God's creation and of God's realm. The disciples responded to her as if she was a non-person. She was not Jewish. She was a woman. She had no business disturbing them. And finally, in order to not even have to acknowledge her to her, they went to Jesus and said, "Do something about her." Even Jesus initially responded to her as if he was, in his humanity, caught up in the racism of his own culture. He too referred to her in the ways in which people referred to her kind in those days, calling her a dog. The lesson of this woman is the ability of others to see God's power, even when we don't, and even when they might be people we would exclude from our own circle of comfort. One of the places where we can see that faith emerge is where we see love emerge. When we see a love for another person that comes forward and becomes an advocate, a fierce sort of love that desires for somebody else, something that we're not able to provide for ourselves, but we believe is possible in God's creation. A woman's love for her daughter that she believed Christ had power to do something for. She became an advocate for her daughter. And in that sense, she was like a dog, persistent and hanging on like a terrier, not willing to let go until she was satisfied. For whom will our faith express love abundantly? For our families, obviously. For one another in this congregation, to be sure, as we bring one another's names before God in prayer. But will we allow ourselves to be the voice for those whose voice is silenced, or who otherwise are unable to be heard above the noise of this world's ways? There are people who are willing to offer themselves as advocates for people who do have a voice. It's just because we don't see how someone else fits in, though, just because their voice isn't one of those usual voices, doesn't mean they're not to be taken seriously. And just maybe that person, like the ones the disciples tried to ignore, is the one who can show us not just a little faith, but a great faith. Even more to the point, just because we don't see how someone fits in doesn't mean that person is to be excluded or ignored. We may need to experience God's love in the love we can see even as it operates in the lives of others for other persons. The woman who was not included in the circle of the faithful had a love which Christ responded to. And those who love their children, who love their partners, who love those alongside whom they struggle and yet are not those whom we invite into our circle, may be the ones that Jesus turns to and says, "You of great faith." In a world in which too often too many are excluded or are required to conform to the notions of people of what is right and proper. And when they don't, they're left outside with no one to advocate for them. But great is the faith of those whose love leads them to advocate for another. We are people of little faith, enough for ourselves. We can be people of great faith, enough for our love to extend to others. Oh, you of great faith, see what God can do